I still taste the ash. 23 years since Verden's fall, and my mouth carries that specific flavor, not just burned promethium or scorched flesh, but something organic and wrong, like the Emperor's light itself had been metabolized and excreted by something that shouldn't exist. The medicos tell me it's psychosomatic. The augmetic tongue they grafted after I chewed through the original doesn't have taste buds. But I taste it anyway, every morning when I wake in the veterans' ward, every night before the dreams come. They want me to tell the story to the new recruits. Colonel Vash thinks hearing it from someone who lived will prepare them better than tactical briefings. He's wrong, but I tell it anyway, because orders are orders, and because some part of me needs to say it aloud, needs to make it real by speaking it into existence again and again, as if repetition might somehow cauterize the memory. We were 3rd Platoon, Verden 47th Light Infantry, attached to the southern defensive line when the Fleetmaster sent the astropathic warning. Tendril approaching. Expect contact within 6 hours. 6 hours. We'd been on Verden the 4 for 8 months by then, turning a marginal agri-world into something that could feed 3 subsectors. The Imperium had poured resources into those fungal paste processing centers, those protein synthesis vats. Losing Verden meant losing the caloric output that kept 14 billion mouths fed across the segmentum obscurus. The xenos didn't care about our logistics. I remember Sergeant Macros calling formation, his voice carrying that particular quality of controlled urgency that non-coms develop after their first real engagement. He'd been at Bad Landing, lost his left leg there, walked on a decent augmetic that only clicked when the humidity got bad. It was clicking that morning. Check your cells. Check your neighbor's cells. Nobody dies because of a drained power pack. Understood? We understood. We drilled this. The Munitorum had issued each of us 3 spare cells, 2 frag grenades, and a monomolecular combat knife that could saw through chitin if you had the strength and the time. They'd also issued us a single Departamento Munitorum pamphlet titled Facing the Devourer, Survival Protocols for Guard Infantry. I'd read it cover to cover. It was 12 pages long and contained phrases like maintain fire discipline and target bioweapon symbiotes, and the Emperor protects the faithful. It never mentioned what to do when you realized the Emperor's protection had limits. The first sign was the birds. Verden's ecosystem hosted these small, 6-winged avians that nested in the fungal towers officially designated Aves Verdanis minora, but everyone called them screamers because of the noise they made at dawn. They stopped screaming at about 0400 hours. I was on watch, 3rd rotation, and I noticed the silence before I noticed the smell. The smell came next, something between decomposing vegetation and sweet rot, carried on a wind that had shifted direction without any meteorological reason. Corporal Venn was beside me in the trench. Good soldier, Venn. Came from a hive world, one of those deep stack cities where you never saw the sky. He'd told me once that joining the guard was the first time he'd breathed unrecycled air. He was breathing carefully now, through his mouth, trying to filter out the stench. That's them, he said. Quiet. Factual. That's the smell from the briefing vids. The briefing vids. Yes. Grainy picked captures from other worlds, other battles. We'd watched organisms the size of battle tanks tear through defensive positions. We'd seen footage of a carnifex eating through a lemon rus, peeling the ceramite like protein foil. The commissar had shown us these things to prepare us, to steal our faith. What the vids never conveyed was the scale, the sheer, impossible wrongness of biology weaponized past any natural limit. The ground started vibrating at 0437. I marked the time because I was staring at my chrono, watching the seconds tick toward dawn, praying the sun would rise before they arrived. Stupid thought sunlight wouldn't help. But humans are pattern-seeking creatures, and we find comfort in dawn even when dawn means nothing. The tremors built gradually. At first I thought artillery, distant impacts from our own lines. Then I realized the rhythm was wrong. Artillery has regularity, mechanical precision. This was organic. Footfalls. Massive footfalls, many of them, approaching in a tide that made the trench walls shed dirt in little cascades. Macross was moving down the line, his augmetic clicking faster now, keeping time with his elevated pulse. Steady. Wait for the flares. Nobody fires until you have a target. His voice was steady. I focused on that steadiness, used it as an anchor. The guard trains you to find strength in hierarchy, in the chain of command. As long as the sergeant sounds confident, you can pretend there's a plan, pretend someone knows what they're doing. The sky lit up at 0441. Flares, dozens of them, shot from the heavy weapons emplacements behind our position. They rose in arcing parabolas and bloomed into harsh white light, turning night into a weird noon-bright landscape that cast too many shadows in the wrong directions. That's when I saw it. Distance distorts memory, but I swear it was 3 kilometers away when the flares caught it, and I could still make out details. The briefings called them Bio-Titans, Hive Tyrant Supremus, in the official taxonomies. The names felt inadequate. You can't name something like that and make it smaller, more comprehensible. It was the size of a cathedral. No, it was a cathedral, a walking Gothic nightmare of chitin and sinew, festooned with weapon symbiotes that pulsed with bioluminescence. It had a head. No. Multiple heads. No. One head with multiple sensory clusters, each the size of a chimera transport, studded with eyes that reflected the flare light in shades of purple and red. Behind it came the swarm. I use that word, swarm, because language fails for anything more precise. Thousands of organisms moving as one distributed nervous system. Hormagaunts in the front, those blade-armed nightmares that move like athletes, like dancers, covering ground in leaping bounds that eat distance. Behind them, larger forms, Tyranid warriors coordinating the advance, their chitin painted with bioacid scorch marks from previous battles, and threading through the mass, creatures I couldn't classify, didn't have names for. Things that looked like evolution had been given stims and told to innovate in the worst possible directions. But the Titan dominated. It moved with terrible purpose, each step crushing fungal towers into paste, leaving footprints that would become pools of acidic runoff. Weapon symbiotes along its carapace tracked independently, swiveling toward our positions. I could see them charging, internal bioreactions building luminosity until they glowed like infected wounds. Fire! Macro screamed it, and the order rippled down the line. 300 lasguns opened up simultaneously, a sound like cloth tearing amplified through speaker grills. The night lit up, red las beams punching through the darkness, most aimed at the Bio-Titan because that's what your eyes fixated on. What your hindbrain insisted was the primary threat. The beams splashed against its carapace like water on stone. I watched my las beam, I could track it, could follow the coherent light from muzzle to impact, hit the Titan's forward leg armor, and dissipate into thermal bloom without leaving a mark. Beside me, Ven was firing in controlled bursts, 3-round groups, like the manual instructed, aiming for joints, for the soft tissue between armor plates. Professional, disciplined, completely ineffective. The Hormagaunts hit our line at 0443. Time does something strange in combat. The Munitorum training emphasizes this. Expect temporal distortion. Trust your drills. Let muscle memory carry you through. What they don't tell you is how time can simultaneously compress and expand, how you can experience a 5-second interval as both an instant and an eternity. The first Hormagaunt that reached our trench leaped the 15-meter gap in a single bound. I watched it clear the razor wire, the crude frag mine field, the firing step, watched it arc against the flare light with its blade arms extended like some obscene diving raptor. Then shot it mid-air. 3-round burst, center mass, las beams punching through the thorax. It landed in our trench anyway, already dead, but carrying enough momentum to crush Private Hendel beneath its corpse. Hendel screamed for maybe 2 seconds. Then his ribs punctured something vital, and the scream became a wet gurgle. More came. They poured over the trench line like a living waterfall. I was firing on full automatic now, forgetting the manual, burning through my first power cell in seconds. The lasgun's heatsink was already warning hot against my cheek. I killed 3 of them. I'm certain of 3. One I burned through the head, cooking its brain until the skull cracked from thermal expansion. One I caught in the leg cluster, severing enough muscle that it collapsed, and then bayoneted it. The third I shot maybe 40 times, perforating its torso until it looked like lace, but it kept coming until Macros hit it with a crack grenade that reduced it to steaming chunks. The trench was full of them. We were supposed to have fallback positions, secondary lines, a defense in depth, but the Bio-Titan hadn't even reached us yet, and our primary line was already collapsing. I could hear the heavy bolters from the fortified positions behind us, the reassuring thump-thump-thump of mass reactive rounds detonating. I could hear screaming, human voices hitting registers that shouldn't be possible. I remember thinking, with crystal clarity, this is how it ends. Not in some glorious last stand, not holding the line while the citizens evacuate, just drowning in xenos that breed faster than we can kill them. Then the Bio-Titan fired. The weapon was biological. I want to be clear about this because the distinction matters. It wasn't a plasma cannon or a laser destroyer. It was a living thing, a symbiote fused to the Titan's carapace. And when it discharged, it vomited a stream of bioacid under such pressure that the air itself screamed. The beam, if you can call it a beam, when it's actually a coherent jet of digestive enzymes traveling at supersonic velocity, hit Bunker 7. Bunker 7 was reinforced ferrocrete, 3 meters thick, designed to withstand sustained artillery bombardment. The bioacid melted through it in 4 seconds. I watched the bunker's surface ripple, bubble, and slough away like fat in a rendering plant. The heavy bolter crew inside had maybe enough time to understand they were dying. Maybe not. I hope not. The Titan swept the beam across our secondary line. Bunkers dissolved. A Lehman Russ battle tank took a direct hit. The acid ate through the dorsal armor, flooded the interior, and I heard the crew screaming over the Voxnet before someone had the mercy to cut the channel. The beam carved a molten trench through the landscape, turning fungal towers into smoking pillars of dissolution. And still the Hormagaunts kept coming. Macros was hit at 0446. A blade arm took him through the shoulder, punching out through his chest in a spray of red. He looked surprised. That's what I remember most, the surprise on his face. Like he'd been told a joke he didn't understand. He tried to say something, probably an order, probably something to keep us fighting. Instead, he just exhaled blood and collapsed. The augmetic leg was still clicking. Command structure is everything in the Imperial Guard. You build it into your nervous system. When the officer dies, the sergeant takes over. When the sergeant dies, the corporal steps up. When the corporal dies, you follow the trooper with the most combat experience. But what happens when everyone's dying simultaneously? What happens when the chain of command doesn't break cleanly but shatters into fragments? Ven started laughing. High, hysterical laughter that cut through the screaming. "We're dead," he shouted, still firing, burning through his second power cell. "We're dead, we're dead, we're dead." He wasn't wrong. The honesty of it was almost refreshing. I grabbed Hendel's spare cells from his corpse. He wouldn't need them, and kept firing. Not because I thought it would matter, because if I stopped firing, I'd start thinking, and thinking would lead to understanding, and understanding would break me. So I fired, chose targets, squeezed trigger, watched xenos die one at a time while thousands more filled their places. The Tyranid warriors entered the trench at 0448. These were different from the Hormagaunts, bigger, smarter, carrying bio-weapons that spat beetles the size of your fist, projectiles that burrowed into flesh and then exploded. I watched one hit Private Thace. The beetle went in through his abdomen, and I could see it moving under his skin, tunneling upward toward his chest. Thace was clawing at himself, trying to dig it out with his knife. Then it detonated, and he came apart from the inside, ribs spreading like flower petals. I shot the warrior that killed him. Full auto, entire power cell, burning through las beams until my weapon was dry. The warrior's carapace was thicker than the Hormagaunts, designed to absorb energy weapons. I cooked it anyway, held the beam on its head until the brain matter boiled and burst the skull casing. It fell. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no victory. Just the mechanical process of loading another cell, finding another target. That's when I saw Private Yeln die. And that's when something changed. Yeln was young, maybe 19 standard. Came from a shrine world, one of those places where they still practice the old rites. He'd kept a prayer scroll in his flak vest over his heart, like it would stop a blade. A Hormagaunt took his head off with one stroke. Clean decapitation, surgical precision. His body stood there for maybe 2 seconds, blood fountaining from the neck, and then it collapsed. The Hormagaunt picked up the head. I don't know why I fixated on this detail. Battlefields are full of obscenities, of violations of human dignity so profound they should shatter sanity. But I watched that xenos creature hold Yeln's head. Watched it examine the face with what looked like curiosity, and something in my mind just inverted. I started laughing, just like Ven, except my laughter wasn't hysterical. It was cold, quiet, the laugh you make when you finally understand the joke. The joke was us. The joke was the Imperium. We'd built cathedrals to the Emperor, drafted trillions into service, convinced ourselves we were the galaxy's rightful inheritors, and here was a creature that had never heard of the Emperor, that couldn't comprehend worship or faith or duty, holding the head of a true believer like a curious toy. The xenos wasn't being cruel. It didn't have the cognitive capacity for cruelty. It was just investigating, learning, adapting, and that was so much worse than cruelty. Something broke in me then. Not my courage that had already fractured. My paradigm broke. The framework of belief that let me be Guardsman Castell, loyal servant of the Imperium, defender of humanity. Because what was I defending? What was humanity worth if we were just meat to be processed by something that viewed us with the same scientific interest we'd view a particularly complex fungus? I kept fighting. That's important to understand. I didn't desert, didn't break, didn't throw down my weapon. I fought harder. But I fought the way you'd work a machine you hated, the way you'd serve a master you despised, mechanically, efficiently, without any of the emotional investment that makes a soldier something more than an armed automaton. The Bio-Titan reached our position at 0451. You can't understand the scale until it's directly above you. It's one thing to see it kilometers away, another to stand beneath it. The foot that came down on our trench was the size of a rhino transport. I watched it descend, saw the clawed toes spread for grip, saw the biomechanical musculature flex beneath translucent chitin. The air pressure changed. My ears popped. The foot came down and crushed 15 meters of trench into compacted paste dirt, razor wire, and 12 men just pulped into the soil. I wasn't in that section. I was 30 meters west, firing uselessly at the Titan's underbelly, watching my las beams splash against armor that was designed, evolved, grown. What verb applies to Tyranid bioengineering? To shrug off weapons more powerful than anything in an infantry squad's arsenal. The Titan had other weapons. I'd read about them in the briefing materials, seen them in the grainy picked captures, death spitters, venom cannons, stranglethorn launchers. Each one was a living organism, an independent creature that existed in symbiosis with the Titan, and each one was designed to kill in a specific, horrifying way. The Death Spitter fired at Bunker 3. The projectiles were beetles. I keep coming back to beetles because that's the closest Terran analog, but these were the size of artillery shells, and they flew in swarms of hundreds. They hit the bunker's firing ports and began eating their way inside. I could hear the crew screaming over the Vox. One of them was still screaming when the beetles reached his lungs and began breeding there, using his respiratory system as an incubator. The screaming took on a buzzing quality, like static over the Vox, except it was biological, the sound of insect wings vibrating in a human throat. Then the venom cannon fired. It targeted Medicae Station 2, where we'd set up triage. The venom wasn't acid. Acid dissolves, burns, consumes. This was something else. Toxins engineered at a molecular level, designed to attack nerve function, muscle control, cellular cohesion. The Medicae staff, 3 combat medics and maybe 20 wounded, died standing up, their bodies seized, every muscle contracting simultaneously with enough force to snap bones. They fell in twisted shapes, limbs bent at angles that proved their own strength had broken them from the inside. The Titan moved forward. It wasn't hurrying. That was the worst part. It moved with a terrible patience, the confidence of an apex predator that knows its prey cannot escape. Each step crushed a section of trench, obliterated a bunker, reduced our defensive line to so much biological rubble, and I kept firing. Kept killing Hormagaunts, kept dying by degrees while my body continued to function. Ven died at 0454. A warrior shot him with a bioweapon I didn't recognize, some kind of spore launcher that burst against his chest and immediately began sprouting. I watched fungal growth erupt from his torso, fast-growing tendrils that punched through his flak armor, his uniform, his skin. He was screaming, clawing at the growth, and the more he tore away, the faster it spread, as if the trauma stimulated reproduction. It colonized him in maybe 30 seconds. By the end, I couldn't see his face anymore. Just a mass of purple-black fungal tissue shaped roughly like a man. I shot him. Mercy kill. Last beam through the skull, cooking the brain and hopefully the fungal infection. He collapsed. I took his remaining power cells and kept fighting. The others were dying too. I could see it happening across the trench, could track the dissolution of our platoon in individual deaths that accumulated into collective annihilation. Private Guest, pulled from the trench by a Ravener that had tunneled beneath our position, just yanked underground in a spray of dirt, gone in an instant. Corporal Shen, fighting with a bayonet after her last gun jammed, actually killing 2 Hormagaunts before a third disemboweled her. Trooper Vex, the squad Vox operator, calling for artillery support that would never come, still transmitting even as the xenos tore him apart, dying with the Vox caster held to his lips. The artillery support he called for was 11 kilometers away, trapped in their own desperate battle. I know because I survived long enough to read the after-action reports. Not that it mattered. Artillery wouldn't have helped. The Bio-Titan's carapace could shrug off Earthshaker shells. What we needed was orbital bombardment, Titans of our own, entire companies of space marines. What we had was 300 light infantry with lasguns and a colonel who believed in the Emperor's divine protection. The colonel died at 0458, when the Titan's bioplasma weapon, that's what they called it later. Though bioplasma feels like a contradiction, like cold fire or gentle death, hit the command bunker. The weapon didn't just melt the bunker, it superheated the air inside to temperatures that flash-cooked everyone in the structure. The bunker remained intact, a sealed tomb containing human-shaped cinders that had been colonels and captains and command staff 5 seconds earlier. Command structure collapsed. No more orders, no more tactical coordination. Just individuals and small groups fighting their own private wars, holding patches of ground because nobody had told them they were allowed to retreat. I don't remember deciding to fall back. I remember firing my last power cell, watching the charge indicator drop to 0, and then just standing there in the trench with an empty weapon, surrounded by the dead. Tyranid dead, human dead, all mixed together in a composition of violence that would have been abstract art if it weren't so specifically horrifying. A Hormigont leaped into the trench 3 meters away. It saw me. I saw it. For maybe 2 seconds we just looked at each other, man and xenos, predator and prey, two products of evolution that had no business occupying the same planet, but here we were anyway, brought together by the Imperium's expansionist appetite and the Tyranids' need to consume. It moved toward me. I pulled Hendel's combat knife monomolecular edge, capable of soaring through chitin given enough time and pressure. I didn't have time. I had maybe 1 second before those blade arms opened me from groin to throat. Then a las beam took the Hormigont's head off. I turned. Trooper Lemus was standing 10 meters down the trench, his las gun still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. He looked at me. I looked at him. We were the only 2 soldiers I could see still standing in our section. "We need to leave," he said. Flat, factual, not a question. I nodded. We climbed out of the trench and ran. Retreat is the wrong word. Retreat implies organization, implies units falling back in good order to secondary positions. What we did was flee. We ran across the fungal plains of Verden IV, while the Bio-Titan destroyed everything behind us. I could hear it, the crash of its footfalls, the shriek of its weapon symbiotes, the collective howling of the swarm that followed in its wake like pilot fish trailing a shark. Lemmas lasted 200 meters. Something caught him from behind. I didn't see what, didn't look back, just heard him scream, and then stop screaming. I kept running. The fungal towers provided some cover, their massive trunks blocking line of sight. I ran between them, following no route, just putting distance between myself and the dying. Other soldiers were running too. I'd see them occasionally, figures in tattered flak armor sprinting through the spore mist. Sometimes they'd wave, try to form up, find strength in numbers. I avoided them. Groups drew attention. Groups got targeted. I ran for maybe 15 minutes before my body gave out. Combat cocktails can only do so much. The stims the guard issues before battle, the adrenaline your own glands produce, the sheer animal terror that keeps you moving past physical limits. Eventually, biology asserts dominance. My legs stopped working. I collapsed behind a fungal trunk, gasping, tasting that ash flavor, except now it was mixed with blood, from lungs strained past tolerance. That's when I heard it coming. The Bio-Titan. Still advancing. Still processing the battlefield. The way you'd process grain into flour. I could hear it destroying the fungal towers, snapping trunks that were 10 meters thick, reducing the landscape to splinters and paste. It was following our retreat route, cleaning up survivors. I couldn't run anymore. My legs wouldn't respond. I'd pushed them into hypoxic failure. The muscles were just dead weight now, cramping, useless. So I lay there behind the fungal trunk and waited for death, which seemed appropriate, which seemed like the only honest ending to a story that had been lies from the start. The lies we'd been told, that the Emperor protects, that faith matters, that humanity is ascendant, that the gods' sacrifices mean something beyond statistical accounting in some administratum ledger somewhere. The Bio-Titan's footfall shook the ground. It was close now, maybe 50 meters. I could smell it, that organic wrongness, that reek of accelerated evolution and biological warfare. I could hear smaller organisms skittering in its shadow, cleanup crews harvesting biomass from the dead. And that's when I saw it. A trench entrance. Narrow, barely visible beneath fungal overgrowth. Not one of ours, this was older, from Verden's previous war, the planetary unification campaign from 80 years back. The Munitorum had never bothered filling in the old defensive networks. Too much effort for a backwater agri-world. I crawled toward it, pulled myself with my arms, dragging dead legs, moving maybe a meter every 10 seconds. The Bio-Titan was still advancing. I could see it now, glimpses between the fungal trunks, that massive silhouette, those weapons tracking, searching for targets. I made it to the trench, rolled over the edge, fell 3 meters into darkness that smelled of stagnant water and decay. I landed badly. Heard something in my left arm snap, radius or ulnar, I'm not anatomist enough to know which. The pain was immediate and comprehensive, the kind that would normally make you scream. I bit through my lower lip instead, because screaming would give away my position, and some primal part of my hindbrain was still interested in survival, even though the thinking parts had already accepted death. Above me, the Bio-Titan passed. I felt it more than saw it, the vibration of its steps, transmitted through soil and stone, the dimming of ambient light as its bulk blocked the sky. It moved directly over my position, and for maybe 5 seconds I was beneath it, could look up through the trench opening and see its underbelly, that complex architecture of muscle and chitin and weapon symbiotes. Then it moved on, kept advancing south toward what remained of our defensive line, towards secondary positions that would fall just as completely as the primary had fallen. I lay in the trench for 6 hours, alone, broken, listening to the battle continue in the distance, hearing the sounds of annihilation echo across the plains. Around 1,300 hours, the sounds stopped. Silence is worse than screaming. Silence means it's over, means the xenos have won, means everyone is dead, or being processed into biomass that will feed the hive fleet's continued consumption. I lay in the silence and understood what it meant. I should have died there. Would have, probably, from blood loss or shock or thirst. But the Navy still had ships in orbit, and someone on a flagship somewhere decided that even though Verden was lost, the principle of total annihilation should still apply. If the Imperium couldn't have the planet, neither could the xenos. They burned it. Not exterminatus Verden wasn't that important, but sustained orbital bombardment, enough to sterilize the surface, kill the Tyranid advance, deny them the biomass they'd come to harvest. The first impacts came at 1,700 hours. Macro cannon shells the size of habs, hitting the surface at orbital velocities, turning square kilometers into molten glass. The old trench saved me. Ferrocrete walls, deep enough to shield against thermal bloom and overpressure. I lay in the darkness while Verden burned above me, while the Navy scoured the surface clean, erasing the battlefield and everyone who died there, rendering our last stand meaningless, because there would be nothing left to mark where it happened. They found me 4 days later when ground teams came to assess the damage. A combat medicae team. Actually, they were looking for survivors, though they didn't expect to find any. I'd survived on stagnant water pooled in the trench's low points and absolutely nothing else. My arm was gangrenous. I was delirious, feverish, hallucinating conversations with Ven and Macros and Yelm. They tell me I was laughing when they found me. That cold, quiet laugh I'd learned when the paradigm broke. The medicaes saved my arm barely. Aggressive antibacterial treatment, augmetic bone grafts, 6 months of rehabilitation. They saved my life, which I didn't ask them to do but which happened anyway because the Imperium doesn't waste trained soldiers, even broken ones. They gave me commendations, the Valorous Heart, for remaining at my post under extreme duress, the campaign badge for Verden the 4, even though there was no campaign afterward, just ash. They promoted me to corporal, gave me squad leadership, assigned me to training rotations, and eventually, they asked me to tell the story. So I tell it. To fresh recruits who don't understand yet, who still believe in the lies. I tell them about 3rd Platoon and the Bio-Titan, and what it's like when your defensive line becomes an abattoir. I tell them the details, the sounds, the smells, the specific ways their future brothers in arms will die when the xenos come. I tell them everything except the truth. The truth is this: none of it matters. Not courage, not faith, not training, not the Emperor's divine will. When something like a Bio-Titan comes, you die or you don't, and the difference is luck, not virtue. The Imperium will spend your life to buy time measured in minutes. Your sacrifice will be recorded in a ledger somewhere, abstracted into statistics, used to justify the next deployment, the next futile stand. The Guard teaches you that your life has meaning within a greater purpose, that your death serves the Imperium, that the Emperor recognizes your sacrifice. But when you're lying in that trench, when you've watched everyone you know rendered into meat, when you understand that the thing killing you doesn't hate you, doesn't even recognize you as meaningfully different from the fungal towers it crushes in passing, when you reach that understanding, you realize the Emperor isn't watching. The Imperium doesn't care. You're biomass. You've always been biomass. The only difference between you and the xenos is which hunger consumes you first. I don't tell the recruits that part. Instead, I end with something appropriate. The Emperor protects the faithful. Stand firm in your duty. Trust your training. They nod. They believe. They're young. I taste ash and smile. Sometimes, after these sessions, I visit the veterans' ward, talk to others who survived their encounters with the xenos, who came back with augmetics and scars and memories that won't fade. We don't share war stories. Those are for the recruits, for the propaganda vids, for the civilians who need to believe their sacrifices mean something. Instead, we share silence. We sit in the ward's common area, beneath Aquila banners and devotional texts, surrounded by the Imperium's iconography of faith and duty. And we share that cold, quiet understanding that the paradigm broke, that we saw behind the curtain, that we can never quite believe the lies anymore, even though we keep serving, because what else is there? Trooper Gast is there sometimes. Lost his legs to a Moloch, spent 9 months in gene therapy growing new ones. They work, mostly, though he walks with a hitch that won't ever fully heal. He sits in his chair and stares at the wall, and occasionally laughs that same laugh I learned. Sergeant Vorna is there. Her platoon faced genostealers in the underhive of Callista Prime. She's the only one who made it out. Doesn't talk much, but she has these scars across her throat, parallel lines where claws came within millimeters of severing her carotid. She traces them sometimes, absent-mindedly, like she's reminding herself that she survived. We're the Emperor's broken tools. Too damaged for frontline service, but too experienced to waste entirely. So they keep us in rotation, use us for training, for recruitment, for morale. We stand in front of fresh troops and tell them how to fight, how to die, how to serve. And we never tell them the real truth, which is that they're already dead, they just don't know it yet. The ash taste never goes away. The Medicaes were right about that being psychosomatic, but they were wrong about what it means. It's not trauma, it's memory. It's my body remembering what it tasted when the world burned, when everything I believed carbonized along with Verden's surface. Colonel Vash still sends me to do these sessions, still thinks my story will prepare them. And maybe it does, in its way. Maybe hearing about the Bio-Titan plants some seed of understanding, some small recognition that faith alone won't save them. But probably not. They're young. They believe. They look at me with my commendations and my scars and they think, that could be me. I could survive too. I could be the one who makes it back. And I let them believe it. Because what's the alternative? Tell them the truth and watch their morale collapse before they even reach the battlefield. Better they die with hope than live with understanding. I think about Macross sometimes. About that surprised look on his face when the blade arm went through him. I wonder if, in that moment, he understood. If the paradigm broke for him too, or if he died still believing, still faithful. I hope he stayed faithful. One of us should have. The Imperium continues. Verden the Four was resettled eventually. New colonists shipped in to restart the fungal farms. New guard regiments deployed to provide security. The Munitorum doesn't mention what happened there. Too demoralizing. Better to pretend it's a fresh start, a virgin world, blank slate for humanity's expansion. I wonder if the new colonists can taste the ash. If it's in the soil, in the water, in the air they breathe. If Verden remembers what happened on its surface. If planets have memory. Probably not. Memory is a human curse. The universe doesn't remember. It just continues, indifferent, consuming and being consumed in cycles that make our wars look like children fighting over toys in a burning building. That's the real horror I learned that day. Not the Bio-Titan itself, not the specific ways it killed us. The horror is the indifference, the cosmic shrug, the universe looking at humanity's great crusade, our cathedrals and faith and sacrifice, and responding with, "So what? We're not special. We're not chosen. We're not the rightful inheritors of the galaxy. We're just another species competing for resources, and sometimes we lose." I tell this story every few weeks. The faces change, but the story stays the same. I describe the Bio-Titan, the Hormagaunts, the deaths. I watch their faces pale, watch them try to imagine what it's like. And I know they can't imagine it. Not really. Not until they face it themselves. Some of them will survive, most won't. And the ones who do survive will end up here, in the veterans' ward, sharing silence with the other broken tools. We are the Imperium's memory. We're the ones who saw the truth and survived anyway. We're the lies' witnesses, the faith's casualties. We wear the uniform, we carry the weapons, we serve the Emperor, but we taste ash. And we know,